Hello, Seers of Life. We're back. Today, I want to, if possible, make a brief video, which is difficult for me to do. Typically, they drag on, about reading books, and how one may profit from the endeavor of reading books insofar as one reads them well. I think you can read all the books in the world without having read any one of them well. And somebody who has just read one or a few, but has read them well, is much more intelligent than the first, who's read everything but didn't really read anything. And I want to, if I can, tie good and effortful reading together with what Jung describes as the investigation of the unconscious. And I think I can do this. There are perhaps other ways, apart from book reading, that one could exemplify this. For instance, the study of pictures, or even cuisine, foods, people who are food connoisseurs, or just whatever it is that somebody is really intrigued by and enjoys investigating and participating in. I think there are ways of being more observant, attentive, involved in whatever the activity one happens to be doing at any time. There's more or less comprehension of what's all going on. There's more or less involved engagement in whatever it is that one happens to be doing or a part of. And with book reading, the trouble is, and this is why so many people shy away from it, is that it's so damned laborious that we want to just understand what an author says straight away and don't wish to have to get on our laptops or phones and look things up, actually make profitable use of these devices, nor do we want to do the cognitive and intellectual emotions and spiritual emotions inwardly that would lead us to an adequate and proper understanding of the things that authors say. And I just think that this is of inestimable importance. If you're going to spend any time reading books or writing at all, if you're not doing this quote-unquote additional work, though really I think it's quite necessary and that we merely treat it as though it were not, then you're kind of just wasting your time. The whole profit and profitability of the endeavor of reading anything comes, I think, with this inner resolve and determination to just address every little issue about the way that at present you are considering something an author has said. Just picture an author has said some, I won't say simple sentence, but it is just kind of like the composition of it is simple, but as to the meaning and all of the separate parts of the sentence, it's maybe you don't know the definition of this word here at the end, and maybe he uses a figure of speech or something that you may have heard before, but you don't know the meaning of that either. he begins the sentence with somebody's name or some geographical place that you're not sure where it exists on the map or what all has happened there in history. It's just, I've been thinking a lot lately of just how much in life all of us take for granted, and we can't help but do this. But I think that throughout my videos, there should be a very humane sort of message if I'm doing this right. And it's something like, what all that I have to say may not be good for some people because they personally have not gotten so far along the thinking train and haven't really considered very much the big questions in life or the ugliness of certain parts of life or even the more beautiful and rare and ecstatic and religious or mystical sorts of things. It's like the whole gamut of human experience or possible human experience. This is the sort of thing that I am interested in, and if you like my videos, then you're probably quite like me. So for somebody not so interested in human experience from the absolute worst to the absolute best, what I have to say may not be so good for you. Whereas if maybe you have gotten you've gotten along the way of this thinking train and you've entertained big questions and have been meticulous about the details of things, then the things that I say are may be valuable and you may like them. Because I think that as soon as one gets on to this path of considering things and frankly obsessively considering things, this is how I feel I am. It's just I can't help but think about things and all of the details and all of the big questions about life. That's just my nature. I think that though we are few and far between, there are people with such a nature or who have found themselves in such a, if you will, philosophic condition in life. It's actually a problem if you don't make active effort to advance your thinking, because if you're just naturally a kind of obsessive thinker and you don't take initiative to perfect your ways of thinking, then this is my experience at any rate, my thought would just kind of entertain all of the toxic considerations and just fixate on all of the ugliness of life, and that makes it terrible. And just arising the question, why bother? I mean, is anything that I do worth anything at all? I mean, and I won't tell you how far I've gone with this thought train, but let's just say as far as one can go to my mind. I mean, is there any value to it at all? Why do I bother to continue living? And I think that there are people, to no fault of their own, who get there and who even entertain the thought of suicide, the final consideration. And for such people, there's a sort of onus, I think, that you don't continue down that train and completely degenerate and possibly take your own life or lose your life, but rather, as with Nietzsche's Pessimism of Strength in his preface to The Birth of Tragedy that he wrote, I think like almost 10 years after it was initially released, Pessimism of Strength is when an individual in his solitude, has recognized this final consideration, has just seen all of the ugliness of life. If any of you have read Brothers Karamazov, just think about Ivan Karamazov's talk with his younger brother, Alyosha, and just all of the atrocities and obscene behaviors that were carried out by human beings against other human beings. Homo homini lupus est. Man is the wolf of man. That's not said in Brothers Karamazov. Carl Jung says it sometimes, and it's just a famous Latin quote. Can't recall who originally said it. Man is the wolf of man, and there is, I think, a sort of division in the population of all human beings, where you have the great majority who have not recognized the truth of this saying, man is the wolf of man. That is, we are our own villain. I mean, we are our basic problem, and really the world's problem. We are more dangerous than any other creature to ourselves and to all other creatures. There is the great majority who have not recognized this, and then there's a slim few who have, and it's such a damning realization. And if you merely sit with it, I think it almost eats you alive, because it's just so terrible. It's like, basically, we are a problem that demands a solution, and there's no easy way to solve ourselves. It's like, as I said, with book reading, a laborious effort of just every little detail about our life. We have to sharpen it and make it better, and make sure we don't fall off the wagon and blow up on somebody or do something terrible and irreversible. It's like, how did Huxley say it? Every act of life, or everything done by a living creature, is a walk on the tightrope and a walk along the knife's edge. It's just like, we're always required somehow to maintain this balance on this slim platform as we go through life and do the things that we do. And if we lean too much this way or that way, or the wind comes all of a sudden, it's like we're kind of fucked. And that's the seriousness of the situation. But there are infinitely more people who don't recognize that, it seems, or not concretely, than the slim few who do just realize this and can't help but realize it. It's like the realest thing there is. So, to return to book reading, it really comes down to how much the reader of the book wants to understand, how much they care. And I think that the profit of book reading should be that one learns to care sufficiently that he can understand the book the fullest he possibly can. And the magic of this is that if one can become a good book reader, then one can have that same care toward his whole experience of life, everything that comes his way and all that he encounters. There is this engaged condition where you realize the severity of the human situation, that we all stand to fall off the tightrope or the knife's edge any second. And it just may be that there is some responsibility on our part to maintain the balance, that doesn't just happen, but we actually have to make some efforts in order to stay on and to continue. A good book reader learns to care properly for the book he is studying, and I think that this is wonderful because it can attain to a sort of universality where in all that one does and experiences, one is not absent, but one is there and involved and cares to know what right now is hidden from him and that he may perhaps desperately need to know in order that he does not fall off the tightrope or spoil somebody else's life or damage anything in the world. We have to be so careful because man is the wolf of man, and the moment we let our guard down, the wolf, he causes all this destruction, and it's just terrifying how few people consider these sorts of things, but merely just give the wolf free rein and think nothing of it. And just so many things it seems like could go wrong. And part of the humane message that I hope to get across to people is precisely what I was saying before about how there are a handful of us who just begin this deep thought journey where, unlike many others, we do consider a great many things and are kind of obsessive about it. It's like that is a problem. There is, in Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals, something he refers to as Internalisierung des Menschen, which in English is internalization of man. And this is basically what he considered to be the problem of modern man, is that existing in a more secure environment, living indoors, not being a nomadic traveler and fearing that the bears are going to eat him as he advances from point A to point B, and traveling all the time and merely having to worry about getting his fill of food and water for the day and taking care of his tribe. Just more simple concerns and obligations, yet more danger all around. Now it's we have more complex concerns and many more activities that each of us are required to do day to day, but we're not so fearful of the bears. We're more fearful of each other, but even that, just the wolf in us is just one of the many things that we take so much for granted, because everyday life, if you will, wears the countenance of being harmless and safe, but then we hear of school shootings or bombing incidents, and it's just out of nowhere the sleep of everyday life is interrupted by somebody who let the wolf get the better of him and caused all of this destruction. We take for granted that lingering danger until it comes, but nevertheless, we are, in some sense, right to occupy this state of sleep in the everyday, because most of the time things are quite regular and safe, and we can rely that everybody's going to continue in their routines and that we're going to do so, and it's just like this regular functioning of all society. But Nietzsche's internalization of man, the problem of modern man, he considered in Genealogy of Morals, is that he considered that the wolf in us would abduct our conscience or take it over, such that our own conscience inside becomes sort of a bully and torments us over trivialities, because we don't, and at any rate, worry so much about dangers on the outside anymore. So we're not used to having no danger. Thus, our mind or our spirit creates it on its own, such that we torture ourselves internally in a way that nobody else sees, but that just devastates us and makes us depressed and leads us to, as he points out in Will to Power, nihilism and all of these deep questions that I was bringing up earlier as to, does anything really matter? Why do I keep living at all? These are the sorts of problems, the new wolves, that haunt modern man. And I think that is quite right. So I want to end it here, but I'll just say that with book reading, it can be very tedious and it can be a lot of work, but the whole game, if you ask me, is that the author offers you all of these statements and questions, and it's up to you. That's only 50% of the work, and then the other is on your end. It's up to you to crystallize the things the author has said, to look up all that the author has said, to play around with different ways of considering just even single sentences and even the whole book. I can't stress enough the fact that anybody who's read a fair bit will tell you that so many more considerations arise when you don't merely read something once, but you return to it. And when you experiment with different ways of reading the same phrases, I think that an experimental activity and attitude is sort of necessary to a full and comprehensive understanding of a book and really anything at all. And some of my favorite writers of the modern epoch all recommend that we attain to this sort of scientific and philosophic curiosity toward the human being and toward everything that we encounter as individual human beings. I didn't speak as much about the unconscious as I would have liked to, but to me, the very concept of the unconscious serves, in many respects, an identical function to the word God, which helped people in the same way in former ages to consider what lies beyond their present understanding, and that they have things yet to learn. The picture they have of life is not full because we're finite beings with finite understanding. Thus, you must realize that all of the time, God is concealing things from you, or if you want the modern term, there is information or considerations which at present to you are unconscious, that are invisible and you don't suspect them. Thus, it's on us to adopt an attitude of receptivity and a love of learning, recognizing that we don't have the full picture right now and that our understanding of things is finite and it could be improved, and that it's up to us to recognize the limits of our present understandings of anything and to recognize that the possibility exists that we can sharpen them, we can enrich them and make them fuller by being receptive to new information. With book reading, it's you first read a sentence and it sort of offers a meaning more or less clear. You have to be very honest with yourself about everything about it. That is, whether it is clear or unclear, and if something is not clear, then you have to ask yourself, what may I do to clarify it? And then to do all of that tedious, laborious work, looking up things, playing with the very words in your mind, the very phrases. And something I like to do is that often instinctively we like to think of the voice in our heads as being I. I mean, I'm the chatty fellow up here. But I like, when reading a book, to treat it as other, and that the author, I'm in a dialogue with the author. We're having a real conversation. But the beauty of reading books is that you have the choice to alter pace. And I cannot tell you, this is another thing Nietzsche is totally about as a philologist, slow reading. There is something so enriching about slow reading. You catch infinitely more, whether you're reading Plato and St. Augustine and Anselm, the Christian theologians, all of these earlier authors, or whether you're reading the more modern, Husserl, Heidegger, Nietzsche, John Locke, and just whoever it is. All of these highly intelligent and considerate fellows who have done the very inner motions that I'm trying to suggest that we all do, if you take your time and really, as I said, play around with the different ways of reading what they say, looking up everything, and just with every little detail, every thing that you consider vague and unclear, clarifying it and making every little step, however unnecessary you think it is, and just attaining to the fullest possible understanding. It's like, it's more than just book reading. It's a way of life. There is that way which penetrates, which is deeper and richer, more philosophic, and appreciates life. Hermes Trismegistus considers pure philosophy in one of his prophetic treatises to be the admiration and appreciation of the work of God, which is basically everything that may present itself to your observation. It's whenever something presents itself to you, be it the words in a book or be it anything at all, the possibility exists that you may admire the work of God. And believe in God or don't, I think that something along these lines is necessary to understanding any book or anything at all, really, is did you consciously make the effort to fully admire and appreciate what has presented itself to you? So, I think I'll end it there. I just highly advise against an absent-minded view toward anything, especially when one is in troubling situations and has reached these big questions in life. It's like unconsciously, sort of automatically, we tend to regress to a negative way of answering these questions and looking at things. It's up to us to, in alchemical terms, sublimate the opus, transform the negredo, the blackness, to the albedo, the whiteness. It's the blackness, the ugliness of life. It's pain and hurt and insufficiency. That's the very first thing that offers itself to a thinking human being. It's up to that thinking human being to see it as such and to transform it into the sort of consciousness that he would have other human beings exhibit and display, possess in themselves. And so I'm going to go. Thanks, guys.